The frigid waters of the Platte River numbed Randall Lowe's calloused hands as he scrubbed desperately at a soiled diaper, the morning sun barely warming his shoulders. His 6-month-old daughter's wails echoed from the wagon behind him, making his movements more frantic as he tried to finish the washing before she worked herself into a complete fit. 2 months as a widower and single father had taught him many things, but the proper washing of cloth diapers remained a mysterious art that left him feeling utterly defeated most days. "You're doing fine, let me help," came a gentle voice from behind. Randall spun around, nearly toppling into the river's edge. A woman he didn't recognize stood there, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet, wearing a simple calico dress that had seen better days. She carried a basket filled with linens and smiled at him with an expression that held neither pity nor judgment, just simple human kindness. "I'm Penelope Vance," she said, setting her basket down and rolling up her sleeves. "I couldn't help noticing you're having a bit of trouble with those diapers." Randall straightened up, painfully aware of his disheveled appearance. "Randall Lowe," he replied, his voice rough from disuse, "and I'd appreciate the help, Miss Vance, though I hate to trouble you." "No trouble at all," she replied, already kneeling beside him at the riverbank. "You've got to use a bit of lye soap on these stubborn spots, and the rinsing makes all the difference." As she demonstrated the proper technique, Randall studied her face. She couldn't be much past 25, with eyes the color of warm honey and a dusting of freckles across her nose. There was something quietly confident in her movements, a woman who knew her own mind. The baby's cries grew more insistent, and Randall sighed. "That would be Charlotte demanding attention. She has her mother's lungs, God rest her soul." Penelope's eyes softened with understanding. "Why don't you tend to her? I'll finish these up for you." Randall hesitated, unaccustomed to accepting help from strangers. "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," she cut in firmly, "just neighborly. Besides, I'm already here with my own washing to do." With a grateful nod, Randall trudged back up the gentle slope to his wagon, where his daughter's face had turned an alarming shade of red from her vigorous protests. He lifted her with practiced hands, his heart aching as he saw Sarah's eyes looking back at him from their daughter's tiny face. "There now, little one," he murmured, retrieving a clean diaper from his dwindling supply. "There's a kind lady helping your hapless pa with the washing. Perhaps we'll manage to get through another day after all." By the time he'd changed and soothed Charlotte, Penelope had not only finished his diapers, but had hung them on a nearby tree branch to dry in the morning sun. "Miss Vance, I'm deeply indebted to you," Randall said, bouncing Charlotte gently in his arms. "She's beautiful," Penelope said, her eyes on the baby. "How old?" "Just 6 months," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. "Her mother, my wife, died of childbed fever just after she was born." Penelope's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Lowe." "Are you traveling far with such a little one?" "To Fort Laramie," he answered. "My brother's there. Thought he might be able to help me get settled somewhere proper to raise her." Penelope nodded. "I'm headed in that direction myself. My sister married a merchant there last spring." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by Charlotte's contented gurgling as she tugged at her father's beard. "Perhaps," Randall began hesitantly, "if you haven't arranged for travel companions, you might consider joining my wagon. The trail can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone." A flash of amusement crossed Penelope's face. "And you think a man struggling with diapers offers more protection?" Randall's cheeks colored. "I may not know much about laundry, Miss Vance, but I'm handy with a rifle and know the trail well. I was a scout before I settled down to ranching." She studied him for a moment, assessing him with those honey-colored eyes. "Tell you what, Mr. Lowe, I'll travel alongside you to Fort Laramie, and in exchange for your protection, I'll help with little Charlotte. Seems a fair arrangement to me." Randall felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he'd been carrying since Sarah's death. "That seems more than fair to me, Miss Vance." As they worked together to finish their washing and pack up their things, Randall couldn't help wondering what twist of fate had brought Penelope Vance to that particular bend in the river on that particular morning. Whatever it was, for the first time in months, he felt a small flicker of hope for the future. The wagon creaked and swayed as it rolled across the prairie, the vast expanse of Wyoming territory stretching endlessly around them. 3 days into their journey, Randall was still adjusting to Penelope's presence. She'd taken to Charlotte with natural ease, and the baby responded to her gentle voice with delighted coos that eased the constant ache in Randall's heart. "You never mentioned what brings you to these parts," Randall said as they sat beside their campfire. Charlotte slept soundly in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden box padded with blankets. Penelope poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night air. "I worked as a schoolteacher in St. Louis for 4 years," she said. "But when my parents passed last winter, there wasn't much keeping me there." "I'm sorry for your loss," Randall said, the familiar words of condolence tasting bitter on his tongue. He'd heard them so many times after Sarah died. Penelope nodded in acknowledgement. "My sister kept writing about the opportunities out west for new beginnings. She thinks there's need for a proper school in Fort Laramie. There's need everywhere for good teachers," Randall agreed. "Charlotte might be one of your students someday." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee, the vast night sky wheeling overhead with a brilliance seldom seen back east. "May I ask about your wife?" Penelope asked softly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Most times, Randall avoided talking about Sarah, the pain too raw, the memories too precious to share. But something about the quiet night and Penelope's gentle presence loosened his tongue. "We met in Ohio," he began. "Her father owned the general store where I bought supplies before heading west as a scout. Sarah was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day." He smiled at the memory. "Took me 3 years of courting before she agreed to marry me and head west." "She wanted adventure," she said. His voice caught, and he took a moment to compose himself. "We had 4 good years together, built a small ranch near the Green River. When she told me about the baby coming, I thought life couldn't get any sweeter." He stared into the fire. "Never expected to lose her just when our family was beginning." Penelope's hand reached across the space between them, resting lightly on his arm. "She'd be proud of how you're caring for Charlotte." Randall gave a humorless laugh. "Proud? I can barely keep her fed and clean. Sometimes I wake up in the night terrified I'm going to fail her completely." "Yet here you are," Penelope pointed out, "traveling hundreds of miles to give her a better life. That counts for a great deal, Mr. Lowe." "Randall," he said abruptly. "After all we've shared these past days, I think you might call me Randall." Her smile warmed something inside him. "Then I'm Penelope to you." The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air despite it being only late August of 1873. Randall was checking the wagon wheel when he heard Penelope's alarmed voice. "Randall, Charlotte feels warm." He rushed to where Penelope sat holding his daughter, whose usually rosy face was flushed with fever. Panic gripped him as he felt Charlotte's forehead. "She was fine last night," he said, his voice tight with worry. "Babies can take ill quickly," Penelope said, her tone calm but concern evident in her eyes. "I've seen it with my sister's children. We need to cool her down and keep her hydrated." Over the next few hours, they took turns bathing Charlotte with cool water from their canteens, and trying to get her to take a little breast milk that Randall had traded for at their last stop. Penelope fashioned a sling to carry the baby against her body, allowing Randall to continue driving the wagon. They needed to reach the next settlement as quickly as possible. "There's a trading post about 10 miles ahead," Randall said, his knuckles white as he gripped the reins. "They might have medicine, or at least know what to do." Penelope nodded, gently rocking Charlotte, who whimpered in discomfort. "She's strong, Randall. Look how she fights." By the time they reached Hawk's trading post, a ramshackle collection of buildings where trappers and travelers could resupply, Charlotte's fever had worsened. Randall pulled the wagon to a stop and leaped down, helping Penelope with Charlotte. "Is there a doctor here?" he demanded of the bearded man who emerged from the main building. The man shook his head. "No doctor for 50 miles, but my wife Martha's got away with sickness, helped birth half the babies around these parts." Martha proved to be a stout woman with kind eyes and capable hands. She examined Charlotte carefully in the back room of the trading post, her face grave. "It's the summer fever," she diagnosed. "Been seeing it in young ones all season. Not much to do but keep her cool and give her this." She produced a small bottle of dark liquid, willow bark and elderberry. "My grandmother's recipe. Brings the fever down if anything will." Randall and Penelope took turns throughout the night, administering tiny doses of Martha's medicine and bathing Charlotte's tiny body with cool cloths. In the dim light of the oil lamp, Randall watched Penelope singing softly to his daughter, her face drawn with fatigue but determined. "You should rest," he told her. "I can watch her." Penelope shook her head. "I'm fine. Besides, she seems calmer when I sing to her." "What's that song?" he asked, listening to the gentle melody. "Just an old lullaby my mother used to sing," she replied. "About angels watching over sleeping children." Something about the tenderness in her voice brought a lump to Randall's throat. In just a few days, this woman had become essential to him and Charlotte in ways he couldn't articulate. Dawn was breaking when Charlotte's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes and reached a tiny hand toward Penelope's face, making the small, gurgling sound that passed for her laugh. Relief washed over Randall so intensely that he had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. "Thank God," he whispered, watching as Penelope's eyes filled with tears of relief. "She's going to be fine," Penelope said, brushing her fingers against Charlotte's cheek. "Our little fighter." Randall reached out, covering Penelope's hand with his own. "I don't know how to thank you if you hadn't been here. But I was," she said simply, turning her hand to squeeze his, "and I'm not going anywhere." They stayed at the trading post for 2 more days, allowing Charlotte to regain her strength. Martha refused payment for her help, but accepted Randall's offer to chop a cord of wood for the winter. The physical labor helped him work through the lingering fear from Charlotte's illness, and by the time they were ready to continue their journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. As he loaded the last of their supplies into the wagon, Martha pulled him aside. "That's a good woman you've got there," she said, nodding toward where Penelope sat playing with Charlotte. "Don't see many who'd take on another woman's child with such devotion." Randall felt his face warm. "We're just traveling companions," he explained. "She's been kind enough to help with Charlotte." Martha gave him a knowing look. "If you say so," she replied, unconvinced. "But in my experience, a woman who looks at a man's child the way she looks at your little girl has feelings that run deeper than kindness." Her words stayed with him as they continued their journey, making him more aware of the small moments between them, the brush of hands as they passed Charlotte between them, the way Penelope's eyes crinkled when she smiled at his attempts at humor, the comfortable silence that fell between them at day's end. A week after leaving Hawk's trading post, they encountered their first serious trouble on the trail. They'd made camp early to allow Charlotte some time out of the confines of the wagon when Randall spotted riders approaching from the east. "Get in the wagon," he told Penelope, his hand moving to the rifle propped against the wheel. "Take Charlotte and stay down." Penelope didn't argue, gathering Charlotte and quickly moving to safety. Randall positioned himself by the wagon, rifle ready but not raised, a gesture that could be taken as hostile. 3 men rode up, trail worn and hard-eyed. The leader, a scar-faced man with a week's growth of beard, pulled his horse to a stop a few yards away. "Afternoon," the man called. "Mighty lonely stretch of trail to be traveling with just one man." "Just passing through," Randall replied evenly. "Heading to Fort Laramie." The men exchanged glances. "That's a fair piece away," the scarred man said. "Got any coffee you'd be willing to share with fellow travelers?" It was a test, Randall knew. Hospitality was expected on the trail, but these men weren't ordinary travelers. Still, refusing outright could spark trouble they couldn't afford. "Coffee's just about ready," he said, gesturing to the small fire. "You're welcome to some, but then you'll need to move on. My daughter's been ill and we need our rest." The men dismounted, and Randall felt the tension in his shoulders increase. From inside the wagon, he heard Charlotte's faint cry and Penelope's soothing murmur. "Got a woman in there?" The youngest of the 3 asked, his eyes shifting to the wagon. "My wife and child," Randall lied smoothly, unwilling to reveal Penelope's unattached status to these men. The scarred man seemed to accept this, settling down by the fire while his companions remained standing, too alert for Randall's comfort. He poured coffee into tin cups, keeping his movements deliberate and his rifle within reach. "Where you boys headed?" Randall asked, maintaining the facade of casual conversation. "No place in particular," the scarred man answered. "Just following opportunity where we find it." The implication hung in the air like gun smoke. These men weren't travelers but predators, searching for easy targets along the isolated trails. Randall had encountered their kind before in his scouting days. The tension broke when Charlotte's wails intensified, and to Randall's dismay, Penelope emerged from the wagon with the baby in her arms. "She won't settle," Penelope explained, her eyes darting nervously to the strangers. "I think she needs some air." Randall moved to her side, positioning himself between her and the men. "Gentlemen, my wife and daughter," he said, the lie continuing to roll easily off his tongue. The scarred man's eyes narrowed as he looked between Randall and Penelope. "Pretty wife," he commented. "Surprised a man would bring such a delicate flower into this wild country." "I'm hardly delicate," Penelope replied, her voice steady despite the fear Randall sensed in her. "And my place is with my husband." The youngest man stood up suddenly. "That's a mighty fine wagon you got. What else you carrying in there besides the lady and the baby?" Randall's grip tightened on his rifle. "Nothing that would interest you, just personal belongings and supplies for the journey." The third man, who hadn't spoken until now, laughed a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Why don't we just take a look for ourselves? 3 guns against 1 makes for poor odds, friend." Randall was calculating his next move when the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. All 6 adults turned to see a group of riders approaching from the west, a cavalry patrol by the looks of their uniforms. The scarred man cursed under his breath and signaled to his companions. "Another time, perhaps," he said to Randall, his tone making the threat clear. Within moments, the 3 had mounted and ridden off in the opposite direction from the approaching soldiers. Randall felt his legs go weak with relief, but maintained his vigilance until the patrol was close enough to hail. "Everything all right here?" The sergeant in charge asked, eyeing the retreating figures of the 3 men. "Just some drifters moving on," Randall explained. "Lucky timing on your part," the sergeant nodded grimly. "Those men match the description of some trouble we've been tracking. Robbed a family 2 days east of here, left the man for dead." They accepted the sergeant's offer to camp nearby for the night, the presence of the patrol ensuring no return visit from the would-be robbers. After the soldiers had set up their own camp a discreet distance away, Penelope turned to Randall, Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Quick thinking, calling me your wife," she said quietly. "I played along when I heard them asking about me." Randall nodded, still shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. "I'm sorry for the deception, but men like that, they see a single woman as fair game." "You don't need to apologize for protecting us," Penelope assured him. "I'm just grateful you knew how to handle them." "We were lucky," Randall admitted, "if the patrol hadn't come along when it did." He trailed off, unwilling to voice the possibilities. Penelope reached out to touch his arm, her fingers light but reassuring. "But they did, and we're safe. That's what matters." Later, as they settled in for the night, the sergeant approached their fire. "We'll be heading in the same direction tomorrow," he informed them. "You're welcome to travel with us to Fort Laramie, safer in numbers." Randall accepted gratefully, and for the next 4 days, they journeyed alongside the cavalry patrol. The soldiers took a shine to Charlotte, bringing her little treats and making her laugh with funny faces. Randall watched as Penelope charmed them all with her intelligence and quiet wit, telling stories from her teaching days that had even the most hardened veterans chuckling. On their final night before reaching Fort Laramie, as they sat around the campfire with the soldiers, one of the younger men asked how long Randall and Penelope had been married. Before Randall could respond, Penelope smoothly answered, "Not long enough to stop feeling like newlyweds," and gave Randall such a warm look that he felt his heart skip a beat. Later, when they were alone by their wagon, Randall felt compelled to address her comment. "You didn't have to continue the pretense," he said. "I'm sure the soldiers would have protected you regardless." Penelope busied herself with folding a blanket. It seemed simpler to maintain the story we'd established, she replied. Besides, it's not entirely untrue, is it? What do you mean? Randall asked, confused. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. We may not be married, but we've become a family of sorts these past weeks, haven't we? You, me, and Charlotte. Randall felt something shift inside him, a recognition of a truth he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. Yes, he agreed softly. I suppose we have. They arrived at Fort Laramie the following afternoon, the imposing wooden walls of the military outpost rising from the plains like a mirage. The settlement around the fort had grown substantially since Randall had last visited, with proper streets and buildings replacing what had once been a haphazard collection of tents and shacks. After thanking the cavalry patrol for their protection, Randall and Penelope made their way to the mercantile where Penelope's sister worked. The reunion between the sisters was tearful and joyous, with Martha Vance Collins exclaiming over how thin Penelope had become during her journey and cooing over Charlotte as if she were family. And who is this handsome man? Martha asked, turning her attention to Randall with undisguised curiosity. This is Randall Lowe, Penelope explained. He and Charlotte have been my traveling companions from the Platte River. Randall, this is my sister Martha and her husband Thomas Collins. After exchanging pleasantries, Thomas insisted they come to their home for supper. You must tell us everything about your journey, he said. And Penelope, I've already spoken to the fort commander about establishing a school. He's most enthusiastic about having a proper teacher for the children here. As they walked to the Collins home, Randall felt a strange heaviness settling over him. This moment arriving at Fort Laramie had been his goal for so long, but now that it was accomplished, he found himself dreading what came next. Penelope would stay with her sister, begin her new life as a teacher, and he and Charlotte would continue on to his brother's homestead. Their paths would diverge, and the thought left him feeling hollow. The Collins home was modest but comfortable, with real glass windows and furniture that spoke of Eastern refinement. Over a hearty meal, they recounted their journey, with Penelope diplomatically omitting the more dangerous episodes. And where will you be settling, Mr. Lowe? Thomas asked as they enjoyed coffee after the meal. My brother has a place about 20 miles north of here, Randall explained. I'm hoping to build something nearby eventually. You'll need help with little Charlotte, Martha observed. Have you considered hiring a woman to look after her? Randall shifted uncomfortably. I haven't thought that far ahead, to be honest. Martha exchanged a significant glance with her husband. Well, you know, Penelope has always had a way with children. That's why she'll make such a fine teacher. Penelope colored slightly. Martha, please. The evening concluded with Randall reluctantly accepting Thomas's offer of a room at the boarding house he owned, while Penelope would stay with her sister. As they stood outside the Collins home preparing to part ways, Randall found himself struggling to find the right words. I can't thank you enough for all you've done for Charlotte and me, he began awkwardly. Penelope smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I should be thanking you for your protection on the journey. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Charlotte, drowsy in Randall's arms, reached out toward Penelope with a small whimper. She'll miss you, Randall said softly. Penelope stroked Charlotte's cheek gently. And I'll miss her, both of you, perhaps. Perhaps you could visit us at my brother's place once you're settled with your teaching, Randall suggested, hope creeping into his voice. I'd like that, Penelope replied. Very much. They parted with a promise to meet the following day before Randall headed north. But as he walked to the boarding house with Charlotte sleeping against his shoulder, Randall knew that a visit wouldn't be enough. Somehow, in the weeks of their journey, Penelope Vance had become essential to his life in a way he hadn't believed possible after losing Sarah. The question was whether she felt the same, and whether he had the courage to ask her to join their lives permanently. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of winter lurking just around the corner. Randall had slept poorly, his mind racing with thoughts of Penelope and what the future might hold. Charlotte had been restless too, perhaps sensing the impending separation from the woman who had become a mother figure to her. He fed her a breakfast of mashed apples and milk, then dressed her in her cleanest clothes. Today was important, perhaps the most important day since he'd decided to leave his ranch and seek out his brother. After settling their bill at the boarding house, Randall walked with Charlotte to the fort's trading post, where he'd arranged to meet Penelope before heading north. The settlement was already bustling with activity, soldiers drilling in the yard, traders unloading wagons, women hanging laundry to dry in the morning sun. He spotted Penelope before she saw him, standing outside the trading post in a blue dress he hadn't seen before, probably borrowed from her sister. She looked different here, more polished somehow, with her hair neatly arranged and her posture straight as a schoolteacher's ought to be. For a moment, doubt crept in. Perhaps she belonged here among civilized folk, not out on a homestead with a widower and his baby. Then she turned and saw him, and her face lit up with such genuine warmth that his doubts fled. She hurried toward them, reaching for Charlotte, who babbled excitedly at the sight of her. "Look at you, all dressed up for the day," Penelope cooed to the baby, taking her from Randall's arms. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly," Randall admitted. "Too much on my mind." Penelope looked up at him, something hesitant in her expression. "I had trouble sleeping as well. Martha and Thomas were full of questions about our journey, and about you." Randall ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware he should have taken more care with his appearance. "Nothing too scandalous, I hope." "They think very highly of you," she assured him. "Martha particularly approves of how you've cared for Charlotte under difficult circumstances." They fell into step together, walking away from the busy trading post toward a quieter area near the river. Neither seemed eager to mention his impending departure. "Have you given more thought to the teaching position?" Randall asked, desperate to keep conversation flowing. Penelope nodded. "Thomas arranged for me to meet with Commander Bradford this afternoon. They've offered me quarters within the fort, as befits a single woman of respectable standing." There was a trace of irony in her voice at the last part. "That sounds promising," Randall said, though his heart sank at the confirmation that her future was being arranged here at Fort Laramie. They reached a bench overlooking the Laramie River and sat down, Charlotte contently playing with a button on Penelope's dress. "Randall," Penelope began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our journey together, about how unexpected it all was." "Unexpected is one word for it," he agreed, his throat suddenly dry. "When I found you at the river that day, washing diapers and looking so utterly bewildered, I never imagined where helping you would lead." She smiled at the memory. "I just knew you needed assistance and I could provide it." "You saved us," Randall said simply. "Not just with the practical help, though God knows I needed that desperately, but you brought something back to our lives that I thought had died with Sarah, a sense of possibility, of joy." Penelope's eyes shimmered with emotion. "And you gave me something too, Randall, a purpose beyond teaching multiplication tables and grammar, a family, however temporary." The word temporary hung between them, painful in its truth. "It doesn't have to be," Randall said abruptly, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "Temporary, I mean." Penelope went very still, her eyes widening. "What are you saying?" Randall took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I'm saying that these past weeks have shown me that life can begin again after loss, that Charlotte needs a mother and I need a partner, a wife." He reached for her hand. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming that person, Penelope." For a terrifying moment, she didn't respond, and Randall feared he'd misread everything between them. Then a tear slipped down her cheek. "But what about my teaching?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came all this way to start a new life, to be independent. You could teach our children Charlotte and any others we might be blessed with," Randall suggested. "And as the settlement grows near my brother's place, there will be need for a proper school there too. I would never ask you to give up something so important to you." Penelope looked down at Charlotte, who had fallen asleep against her chest, one tiny hand curled around a lock of Penelope's hair. "She already feels like mine," she admitted softly. "The thought of saying goodbye to her, to both of you, has been breaking my heart." Hope surged in Randall's chest. "Then don't say goodbye, come with us. Be Charlotte's mother in truth, not just in practice. Be my wife." Penelope looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. "This is happening so fast. We've known each other barely a month." "Sometimes a month is enough to know your heart," Randall countered. "I loved Sarah deeply, and nothing will ever change that. But I believe she would want Charlotte to have a mother who loves her, and me to have a chance at happiness again." "What will your brother think? And my sister?" Penelope asked, practical concerns intruding on the moment. Randall laughed softly. "My brother will probably wonder what took me so long to ask. As for your sister, from what I observed last night, she's already planning our wedding breakfast." Penelope's laugh joined his, bright and clear in the morning air. "Martha always did meddle terribly in my affairs." Her expression grew serious again. "If I say yes, you must understand something. I'm not Sarah, and I won't try to be. Our marriage would be something new, something different." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Randall assured her. "You're Penelope Vance, the woman who stepped in at her river and helped a hopeless widower wash diapers. The woman who nursed my daughter through fever and sang her to sleep. The woman I've come to love for exactly who she is." At the word love, Penelope's breath caught. "Do you love me?" Randall brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "With all my heart. It snuck up on me when I wasn't looking, but there's no denying it now." Charlotte stirred between them, blinking sleepily at the two adults who held her future in their hands. "Look at that," Penelope said softly. "She's waiting for my answer too." "And what is your answer?" Randall asked, his heart pounding. Penelope leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "My answer is yes." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at Fort Laramie's small chapel. Martha had indeed prepared a wedding breakfast, and Commander Bradford himself gave the bride away. Randall's brother Richard arrived just in time for the ceremony, having received the hastily dispatched letter announcing Randall's impending marriage. "She's a fine woman," Richard told his brother at the modest celebration afterward, watching as Penelope charmed a circle of army wives with her stories. "Sarah would approve." "I think so too," Randall agreed, his eyes never leaving his new wife. "She's given Charlotte and me a second chance at family." The journey to Richard's homestead took 2 days, with Charlotte delighting in the constant attention from her new mother and uncle. When they crested the final hill and the valley spread out before them, Randall felt a sense of rightness settle over him. "It's beautiful," Penelope said, taking in the view of the rolling grasslands, the creek that cut through the property, and the distant mountains standing sentinel on the horizon. "It is," Randall agreed. "Richard's place is just over that rise there. Our land, the parcel he's been holding for me, begins at the creek and extends east to those cottonwoods." "Our land," Penelope repeated, testing the words. "It has a nice sound to it." Charlotte, sitting on her lap, reached up to pat Penelope's cheek as if in agreement. "We'll build a proper house," Randall promised as he guided the wagon down the slope. "With a room for teaching when the time comes." Penelope smiled, the same warm smile that had first caught his attention at the riverbank. "I have no doubt. But for now, even a tent would be home, as long as we're together." As they approached Richard's cabin, where they would stay until their own home could be built, Randall felt a profound sense of gratitude for whatever fate or providence had brought Penelope to that river on that particular morning. From that simple act of kindness, a woman offering to help a struggling man wash diapers had grown a love that promised to sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. "Welcome home," he said to his wife and daughter, and urged the horses forward into their future. 5 years passed in a blur of hard work, joy, and the constant adjustment that comes with building a life together. The small cabin that Randall and Richard had constructed that first winter had expanded into a proper farmhouse with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 above. The land that had once been untamed prairie now boasted fields of wheat, a thriving vegetable garden, and a small orchard of young apple trees that Penelope had insisted on planting their second year. Charlotte, now almost 6, raced across the yard with her 3-year-old brother James toddling after her. From the porch where she sat shelling peas, Penelope watched them with a smile, her hand occasionally straying to her swelling abdomen where their third child grew. "Don't go too far," she called. Your father will be home soon, and supper needs to be on the table. Charlotte waved acknowledgement without slowing, her dark braids bouncing against her back. She had Sarah's coloring, but Penelope's determined spirit, a fact that both delighted and occasionally exasperated Randall. The sound of hoofbeats announced Randall's return from Fort Laramie, where he'd gone to sell grain and pick up supplies. Penelope stood, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun to watch her husband's approach. Even after 5 years, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. "Papa's back," Charlotte shouted, abandoning her game with James to race toward her father. Randall swung down from his horse just in time to catch his daughter in a bear hug, then scooped up James, who had arrived breathlessly in his sister's wake. "And how are my favorite children today?" he asked, carrying James on his hip as Charlotte danced around them. "I'm not a child," Charlotte protested. "I'm nearly 6 and Mama says I'm to start proper lessons in the fall." "Is that so?" Randall asked, raising an eyebrow at his wife as they reached the porch. "And will this teacher be very strict, do you think?" "Only when necessary," Penelope replied, accepting his kiss with a smile. "Did you get everything we needed?" Randall patted his saddlebag. "Everything on the list, including that blue ribbon you wanted for Charlotte's birthday dress, and letters from your sister." After settling the children with a simple puzzle that Thomas had sent from Fort Laramie, Randall and Penelope retreated to the kitchen to prepare supper together, a ritual they'd established early in their marriage. "Martha writes that the Fort School now has 27 pupils," Penelope reported, reading from one of the letters. "She's persuaded Commander Bradford to hire an assistant teacher." "Do you ever regret it?" Randall asked quietly, pausing in his task of slicing bread. Not taking that position at the fort, Penelope looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Regret it? Why would you ask that now after all this time?" Randall shrugged, his eyes not meeting hers. "You would have had more children to teach, more resources. A proper classroom instead of our front room with 6 neighborhood children." Setting aside the letter, Penelope crossed to her husband and turned his face toward hers. "Randall Lowe, listen to me carefully. I have never, not for one moment, regretted my choice. Yes, I might have taught more children at the fort, but I wouldn't have had Charlotte calling me Mama from the day she took her first steps. I wouldn't have James, or this little one on the way." She placed his hand on her belly, where the baby kicked obligingly as if to emphasize her point. The worry in Randall's eyes eased. "I just want you to be happy, to feel fulfilled in the life we've built." "I am happy," Penelope assured him. "Happier than I ever imagined possible when I left St. Louis, and as for teaching, our little school will grow as the settlement does. Richard told me just yesterday that 3 new families are expected before winter." Randall smiled, drawing her into his arms. "What did I do to deserve you, Penelope Lowe?" "You were washing diapers at a river, looking so completely lost that I couldn't help but step in," she reminded him, her eyes twinkling. "A woman can't resist a man who's trying so hard to care for his child, even when he hasn't the faintest idea how to wring out a diaper properly." Their laughter was interrupted by Charlotte's voice from the doorway. "Mama, James is eating the puzzle piece with the cow on it." Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet except for the crackle of the fire, Randall and Penelope sat together on the porch swing he'd built for her last birthday. The vast Wyoming sky spread above them, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. "I rode by the river today," Randall said, his arm around her shoulders. "Our river where we met." Penelope nestled closer against him. "I still can't believe how much has changed since that day. If someone had told me then that within a week I'd be helping nurse a baby through fever, or that in a month I'd be married to the desperate man I found washing diapers. You would have thought them mad," Randall finished for her. "As would I. After Sarah died, I couldn't imagine loving anyone again, couldn't imagine Charlotte having a mother who loved her as her own." Penelope was quiet for a moment, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I think about Sarah sometimes," she admitted. "Wonder what she would think of how I'm raising her daughter." "She would be grateful," Randall said with certainty. "Grateful that Charlotte has a mother who teaches her to read and to be kind, who braids her hair and kisses her scrapes, who shows her what it means to be a strong woman." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. I hope so. I've tried to make sure she knows about Sarah, that she understands her first mother loved her very much. You have, Randall assured her, and you've given her something equally precious, a family that's whole, not broken by grief. As if to punctuate his words, the baby kicked vigorously, making Penelope laugh through her tears. This one's going to be as strong-willed as Charlotte, I can already tell. God help us all if that's true, Randall said with a chuckle. He placed his hand over the swell of her belly, feeling their child's movements. Boy or girl, they'll be lucky to have you as their mother. Penelope turned her face up to his, love shining in her eyes. And you as their father. You know, for a man who claimed to be hopeless with children when we met, you've become quite skilled. James follows you like a shadow, and Charlotte thinks you hang the moon. I've had an excellent teacher, Randall replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. In more ways than one. As they sat together under the endless sky, the challenges of frontier life, the harsh winters, the uncertain harvests, the isolation seemed small compared to the richness they'd found together. From that chance meeting at her riverbank had grown a love that sustained them both, a family bound not just by blood but by choice. I love you, Penelope Lowe, Randall whispered, his lips finding hers in the darkness. And I love you, she replied, always. Their child kicked again between them. A reminder of the future, they continued to build together, a future that had begun with a simple offer of help from a kind-hearted woman to a struggling father at her river's edge. In the years that followed, the Lowe family became a cornerstone of the growing community. The birth of their third child, a daughter they named Grace, was followed 2 years later by twins, Robert and Ruth, completing their family of 7. The small school that had begun in their front room eventually moved to a proper schoolhouse built by community effort, with Penelope serving as head teacher until well into her 50s. Charlotte grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength, eventually marrying the son of a neighboring rancher and establishing her own home just 3 miles from her parents. James followed in his father's footsteps, taking over much of the farm management as Randall's hair turned silver. The younger children forged their own paths, Grace as a skilled midwife, Robert as a blacksmith, and Ruth, to everyone's surprise, as a newspaper correspondent whose articles about frontier life made their way back east to fascination and acclaim. Through it all, the story of how their family began remained a cherished tale, told and retold at family gatherings, the story of a desperate father washing diapers at a river's edge, and the compassionate woman who stepped in and said, "You're doing fine, let me help."